was he last year?
Cianci.
I should know. Hello, my name is Dean Contover, and this is The Current Buzz. Thank you for watching today. We have Mike Cianci. He's the Animal Control Officer in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. Not only that, he also is now in Tingsboro, Massachusetts, and we're going to talk about that, how that happened. Thank you for coming on the show. You've been on before a couple of years ago, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, good. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of deers. There was a mountain lion spotted in the area of Richardson Road. And what happens when somebody sees or spots a mountain lion and videotapes it? Because I have a videotape of it. What happens? What's the procedure people should do? Stay away from the mountain lion, I presume.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Like I tell people, Chelmsford has a ton of wildlife. I've seen bear, deer, moose, bobcat, you name it, we have it.
Okay.
First off, I tell people always enjoy it from a distance. Never approach, never feed wildlife.
That's including turkeys.
Anything, yeah. Last year we did pass a no ground feeding law based on the amount of turkeys that were taking up residence in certain neighborhoods because people were ground feeding. It also creates a dependency when you start to ground feed. Mm-hmm. Instead of the turkeys now scavenging out through the woods and eating, bugs and ticks and things like that, they're going into homes, families' yards, their lawns, they're eating the seed. Wintertime comes, if those people choose to stop feeding, those turkeys will starve, or some of them will, because they're not adept to hunting like they should.
I see. Bobcats, what should people do in regards to that? Call you right away?
Personally, I love to hear where our wildlife is. I love to see the photos on Chelmsford News, or people send them to me on the Facebook page. But again, observe them from a distance, take your photos from a distance, let them be. In the town of Chelmsford, we have a lot of development going on. We're eating up a lot of wildlife habitat, so you're going to see a lot more wildlife out in the streets and the neighborhoods. Just, enjoy them, but don't do anything to get in their way. Don't never corner a wild animal. Don't feed wild animals, and just let them go about their business. Now, if the animal appears sick, such as mange, which has been big this year due to the drought with fox and coyote.
In other words, they're coming in from not the mountains, but the countryside.
Well, they're coming
in.
in. They're coming in from the habitats that developers are now turning into home lots or apartment complexes.
Oh, parking lots.
So yeah, we're eating up their habitat. So they're making residents in neighborhoods. Okay. So they're learning to coexist. So you have to be careful about how you interact, and we prefer you don't interact.
How come we don't have a law in regards to saying all trash should be in the barrel? Because animals, especially dogs, sometimes they go into the plastic and they rip it open, and there's trash all over the place.
It happens. I mean, a lot of times trash is in the barrel, but if it's not covered and secured, you put it out the day before trash day. Okay. Yeah, coyote will get into it. Raccoons, famous for getting into trash and making a mess. Sometimes domestic dogs will get into it and make a mess. When it comes to domestic animals, there's a concern of what they're eating, because sometimes, they eat something a dog shouldn't eat, may cause them to be sick, upset stomachs, things of that nature. Raccoons, trash can pandas as people refer to them, adorable, but we don't want to encourage them to be living out of trash cans.
Yeah, so cover your trash barrel, buy a trash barrel, spend the money on it, before it becomes law in Chelmsford, which it is not law, but they have that law. It's mandatory that you have to have a trash barrel with a cover, etc.
Right, and we don't want to continue to pass laws that are really unnecessary. As animal control, we prefer to educate our public. We keep the public safe. That's our major concern. Domestic animals safe, and wildlife in that order. So we try to do a lot of education as far as the wildlife people see. Caring for your domestic pets, cats, dogs, ferrets, things of that nature, instead of passing laws to get people to do things.
Okay. Let's talk about coyotes, what people should do. if they see one or a pack of coyotes? They should make noise and keep them away, or
Yeah, a lot of times, lately we've been getting calls for coyotes in people's yards, and what I recommend, and Mass Wildlife also recommends, you can find what they call hazing. So let's say, for instance, at night, you go out, you let your dog out. I always tell people at nighttime, keep your dog on a leash, maybe a 6-foot lead.
well, shouldn't they be on a leash when you're walking them?
If you're off your property,
Off your-
yes.
yes, okay.
Okay, so as long as you're on your property and your dog is under your control, whether it be voice command, collar, they don't have to be leashed. You leave your property, yes, we have a leash law, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But we'll haze coyote. You know, turn your spotlights on, make a little noise, take a look around. Because coyote will walk along the wood line and a property line, back and forth, or they'll hide. So I also recommend, you know, if you have a lot of brush along your property, cut it up so you can see.
Cut it down, you mean?
Well, cut it down
down.
so you can see the roots of the, let's say, your trees and things. It doesn't give a coyote a lot of places to hide.
I see.
But be observant of your
I
surroundings.
see. Have there been any attacks in Chelmsford in regards to coyotes, in regards to cats or dogs? Have you heard anything?
Unfortunately, we do get quite a few calls on missing cats, outdoor cats that haven't returned. We can only assume it may be a coyote or a bobcat. Generally, coyote will not hunt domestic animals. They're usually a kill of opportunity. Say coyote are passing by your yard, they notice a small dog unattended. If they're hungry enough, they may try to grab it. They generally never go after mid-size or large-size dogs unless they're sick. Things like distemper and rabies would cause maybe a coyote to go after a domestic dog, or if you were to just open your door, let the dog out in the yard, and he were to corner a coyote or a fox. Any animal of that nature.
Right.
Groundhogs, raccoons, anything cornered will obviously defend itself.
Right, right. What surprised me is there was a mountain lion in the area. I mean, that kind of threw me for a loop. Is that unusual, or is that?
It's very unusual, and I've seen video, but it hasn't been conclusive. If there's a mountain lion or if there's good video of one, environmental police and Mass Wildlife should certainly be contacted. As far as I know, there have been no verified sightings of mountain lions in town. That being said, I have seen grainy video of a large cat with a longer tail than a bobcat, but I can't say for sure.
I see. All right. In regards to deer, there's a lot of deer in the neighborhood. I remember driving down one evening down Davis Road, and there was a buck, 6-point, during the rut, and it was standing in the middle of the road. What should I do? Toot my horn, shut off my lights, put it on park, because they're blinded by the light, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, deer will stand there and stare into a headlight. I recommend turning your headlights off, but leave your running lights on in case anybody coming up
Right.
the road, you know, is
see it,
behind you.
yeah.
Right. Toot your horn, give it a few minutes to collect itself, and it'll move along its way. Always be cautious if you're coming down the road and you see one deer jump. Generally, there's another deer somewhere close by. So if you see that first deer go by, slow down, know your surroundings, take a look around, because if you assume that's the only deer, you may hit the next one.
I see. Okay, so let's talk about that. What happens if I hit the next one, or that the deer hits me and hits my car? It disables my car, or or at least bends the metal and so forth. Whose responsibility is that? Is it the state that pays it out, or is it my insurance? I don't know.
So yeah, that's
a
your
good
insurance
question.
company. That's an act of nature. I mean, the state's not going to cover wildlife that runs into your car or you strike.
Okay. Well, I mean,
No, it's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Yep, because we do have a good amount of deer every year that are struck by motor vehicles in town.
Yeah.
My recommendation is if you are in an accident with wildlife, you call the police department. They'll send a cruiser out, obviously, check your well-being, determine whether or not your car is safe to travel in,
Okay.
and they'll file a report. Generally, your insurance company will request that report. They'd also forward me a copy of that report upon my return to work, where I will go out to the area. Was the deer killed on site? If it was, I'll pick it up. Sometimes we move them to
That's called roadkill.
roadkill. Yeah. Sometimes we'll bring them out to Baker Commodity in Billerica. It's a processing plant, and they'll they'll render it for the town. It's a courtesy. Other times I may, if the
What
deer,
do you mean by render it? What does
they
that
turn
mean?
them into fat or grease or,
Oh, I see.
yeah.
Do you get food back? I mean,
No, not from them.
No?
If, let's say, you're a Mass resident, you strike a deer, the deer is killed. You do have the option to take that deer as long as you're a resident. If you refuse,
of the town or the state?
the state.
Okay.
If you refuse, anyone in your vehicle who's a Mass resident has the right to accept it.
All right.
After that, it becomes roadkill, and they would send me out, or if I'm not available, sometimes DPW will pick them up.
Okay. Let's say I accept it. It happens right away. What should I do in regards to getting
So again,
meat from it?
a report would be produced. I would make contact with you as soon as I could. My recommendation was, to keep the deer cool until you can either butcher it or have it butchered. I will sign off on it that it was a deer strike. There was a motor vehicle report. It was released from me to the operator of the motor vehicle, who was a resident. All that gets logged, and I send that to the environmental police. So let's say, for instance, you don't know how to butcher a deer. You take it to a butcher,
don't, yeah.
especially out of season.
Right.
If it's not tagged, they may call the EPOs, the environmental police, just to make sure that you collecting the deer is on the up and up, that you weren't poaching the deer without a license.
Ooh, poaching. That's a good word. Poaching means stealing, doesn't it?
Well, poaching means hunting out of season without a license. Yeah, stealing technically when you shouldn't be hunting deer. And there are seasons for does. There are seasons for buck, and then depending on when you get a deer or strike a deer and whether it's doe or buck, if it's out of season, that's why we collect all the data and pass it along.
I see. So would you give me names of a butcher if I had roadkill? Would you give me a name of a butcher? Or?
I could give you names of hunters that might use butchers, or because I don't hunt in Massachusetts. I don't use butchers here.
Oh, okay. But
Or
there
you
are
could
people
call around.
out there.
There are butchers out there that'll do roadkill.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
wild game.
Yeah, wild game, and they also they'll charge you, of course. Yeah.
Yes, of course. So they'll charge you.
Last time I remember was $100, but I don't know. It's probably more than that.
With the way things are, I don't know what it is now, but a professional butcher will probably get you more meat out of a deer than maybe if you're just learning to butcher it yourself.
I see.
How much?
I see. Yeah, I mean they have that. In Vermont and New Hampshire, they have people who they know who to go to in regards to when they go hunting. They know the name, and so it behooves you to get it as soon as possible to get it done.
Right.
Because you don't want to keep it 48 hours.
No, you don't want the meat to spoil, especially if you're new to hunting or you've never butchered a deer. You don't want to butcher a deer with spoiled meat. You eat that, you get sick.
And besides, the deer is heavy.
Yes.
So you have to get somebody that knows what they're doing to pick it up, right?
Yeah, and this time of year we get quite a few calls on people hanging deer in their yard, which is legal if you're a hunter. You can hang the deer to bleed it.
To bleed it, all right.
So you can butcher it. And
So what happens is when there's a deer killed, even in hunting, what happens, you might be driving around western Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and you may see a deer hanging from the tree, and that's normal.
That's normal, provided the individual hanging the deer doesn't allow it to rot in a tree.
Well, most people in Vermont,
No,
and they know what they're doing.
most
yeah.
avid hunters will not
see
do that.
So don't freak out and say, the deer, he's bleeding it and he's going to butcher it and he's going to get meat out of it. Believe me, that's what they do in Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern. And if it has a good rack, they'll keep the rack too.
A lot of guys, yeah.
The rack means the
antlers.
antlers, and when they call it points, it means how many points are on each rack. In other words, if it's 6-point deer, the other day you picked up a 10-point
deer, 10-point buck. Yeah,
10-point buck.
5
Explain
points. So the points are based on the length of what they are, the points on the antlers.
That's correct.
So a 10-point buck would be 5 points on each antler, and I believe they have to be over 2 inches long or 2.5 inches long to be considered a point.
I see.
Beautiful animals.
Yeah, they are.
You look at hunting and you see a rack that's 10, that's a gorgeous deer. That's an older deer with a beautiful rack. Sometimes I may not take something that old. I just admire it from a distance. I might snap a couple of pictures of it and let it be. But it is a trophy deer for some. And I can understand taking it. You render the meat, so you're feeding your family. You could fill an ice chest with deer meat.
Right. Make sure you have a big freezer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you could have the rack mounted, meaning you could have the head mounted. You could have just the rack itself, meaning the antlers mounted on a trophy.
Yeah. What about just the head and the antlers? Is that people do that?
People do that.
Yeah. I interviewed a guy who did that.
Taxidermy.
Taxidermist, yeah. He was on my show.
It's an art
and
like
he was
anything
local.
else. Yeah. Yep.
And that's what he did for business.
Yeah. I mean, you have a trophy deer, you want to show it off.
And people do that. I mean, that's part of the history of America. I mean, they do that. I have a few minutes left, and I like to talk about dogs.
Sure.
That's your.
So domestic animals are one of my specialties.
Yeah.
Dogs especially.
Yeah.
I believe Chelmsford has over 5,000 dogs.
Holy moly!
Somewhere in that number.
Wow.
In town, not all of them are currently registered, so we like to tell people you have December to March. You have a grace period. Every year, it's an annual thing. You have to go to the town, register your dog, which means you get it licensed.
And that's $20 to $15?
$15 to $20 based on whether the dog is fixed or not.
All right.
So you have it registered. They have to be up to date on their rabies. Sometimes they're 1 year, depending on the age of the dog, or 3-year rabies vaccinations. And the reason it's so important is, A, it lets us keep track of dogs that may get out. You're required to put that tag on a collar. That way, if your dog does get out, we can return it home as quickly as possible. If we pick up a dog that's not microchipped, it's not wearing a tag, we have a digital system where I can go to the street that it was picked up on, type in the breed, maybe get a hit on a breed that lives in one of those homes. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. So a microchip is another great tool, which you go to your vet or to a microchip day, you have the dog microchipped, you register it with a company. I have a scanner. All ACOs are required when picking up domestic animals that are found to scan that animal for a microchip. It'll give me a number. There are several microchip companies that I call, and if you've registered it correctly, it'll kick back an address.
Wow.
It's a great tool, fantastic tool. If you do, have a microchip or a tag, generally the first time, I will bring the dog home. I will give you a warning. I will explain the leash laws. And it's not always because we fear the dog is dangerous. Sometimes we don't want the dog to be struck by a car. And because your dog is friendly, doesn't mean it's going to appear that way to someone who's not familiar with your dog.
Right, good point. Explain microchip for some people who are new to this area and what one has to do and how much it costs roughly.
So there are a couple companies that sell microchips. Your veterinarian can help you with that. What they do is they insert it between the shoulder blades generally on a dog. I know horses sometimes get microchipped. Cats, I highly recommend, especially
if
it's an indoor-outdoor cat. People generally will not put a collar on it. You don't want it to get hung up running from something or in a tree.
Good point.
And because cats sometimes get struck, if I can scan it for a microchip and get a name or a residence, I can call them, I can return the cat if they want it back. If they don't, then we'll dispose of it properly. But I always like to give people closure as far as, cats that are go missing. Because not everybody calls animal control when their cats go missing. Sometimes they assume wildlife must have got it, so they write it off.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. How much does a microchip cost these days?
Honestly, that depends on the vet. I've seen some places do days where they'll do rabies vaccination microchips at a discount, and some vets, it is what it is, whatever.
So we're talking $100?
Yeah, I would guess somewhere in that neighborhood, about $100 to microchip a dog.
Oh, I see. So it's well worth it. But what happens if you give it away to your cousin, the dog to your cousin, that microchip is still there, but it's still registered to you?
So that happens sometimes, and what we'll do is we'll call whoever the microchip is registered to, and if they've given the dog away, hopefully they have the contact information. I will reach out to that person and say, hey, listen, the dog is microchipped whether you knew it or not. This is the company holding the microchip information. You need to call them and update it. That way, if the dog gets out again and is scanned, somebody knows the correct owners.
I see. Okay. Let's talk about the liability in regards to owner versus keeper. My neighbor, I live in an apartment building, let's say, and my neighbor says, "Hey, can you walk the dog?" I walk the dog because they're at work or something like that. And I walk the dog, trying to be a nice person, and so forth. The dog bites someone. What happens in that situation? Who's liable? Is it the owner or is it me that walks the dog?
Well, I mean, sometimes, dogs do bite. It happens.
Yeah.
There's a misconception for some reason that if a dog bites, especially owners, that I will come and take your dog. That is wrong. First thing we do is, you make sure the individual that's bitten doesn't need medical attention. We dispatch myself or a patrol car, maybe Trinity, to evaluate. I write the report based on both accounts. Let's say you're walking the dog, it's unprovoked, somebody walking by, the dog just nips them. I write my report that way, but I also log, is the dog registered with the town? Is it up to date on its rabies shots?
Does it have a license, in other words?
Is it licensed? Yeah, is it wearing its license? What are the circumstances of the bite? Then there's a 10-day state mandated quarantine for the dog, which is done at home. We don't seize your dog and hold it for 10 days. You are required to keep an eye on the dog, limit its contact with anybody outside the home for those 10 days. You watch any change in behavior. If it becomes lethargic or more aggressive for no reason within those 10 days, or something's not right, call us immediately, call your vet. What we're looking for, and this is mandated by the state, is any sign of rabies. Now, that's not to say a dog that bites has rabies, but they look to keep an eye on those animals. If your dog's not rabies vaccinated and there's a bite, then the hold is, I believe, 45 days. So it's good to be
It's a hold that you
legal.
hold in the kennel?
No.
Oh.
The only time we would hold it in a kennel is if you were under the 10-day state mandated quarantine and I caught you walking your dog off your property,
I see.
or the dog was unattended.
I see.
Then we would seize the dog and hold it for the remainder of that quarantine.
I see.
You have to follow these guidelines, because even if your yard is fenced in and your dog's under quarantine, we're not going to assume it does or doesn't have rabies, but if you let it out at night and it bites another animal and your dog has rabies, now there's a transfer. So that's why you're required, even in your own property during quarantine, to keep an eye on your dog, keep it leashed while it goes to the bathroom, bring it back in the house.
I live near the dog park. I see you there occasionally, park there. Are you there for the dogs or for the people or for both?
For both. And, I love the dog park. It's a
Yeah.
great resource.
It's 7 years old.
It has a huge following. I treat it as kind of like a safe zone. When I step into the dog park, a lot of people panic. I just want to get to know our resident dogs and get to know the people. I'm not there to do anything unless there's an incident. And again, there's a misconception where if there's a dog bite at the park or anywhere, I'm going to take your dog away. That is not true. We want safety for both the owners and the dogs.
Right.
Some dogs are very well socialized, others not so much. If you have concerns about your dog's social behavior, don't go to the dog park during the busy hours. Take, either early morning or evening when it's a lighter traffic crowd.
Good point, yeah.
Take your dog, because you're not allowed to keep it leashed within the dog park. So you can start to socialize your dog, and you have to learn to read your dog's behavior and other dogs' behavior.
Good point.
Keep an eye on them.
Yeah. Any incidents in regards with people?
From time to time, there's a clash of personalities. It happens.
Yeah.
With people as dogs, not everybody gets along. Again, that's why I say know your dog, know its signs. The tucked tail, the ears laid back, the hair on the back standing up. I know they say, you got to be within an arm's reach or so of your dog at the park, but we all know that's not really realistic.
Yeah.
The park is a good size.
Yeah.
But, as you're socializing with other dog owners, keep your eyes on your dog, listen, watch the dog scrap a little bit.
So the park is open from sunrise
to
sunset.
Yep.
So now it's darker and
earlier.
Do you close it? Do you fence it off, or do you?
I do not.
Evenings.
No, we do not close it. We ask people, especially those that are common people going, that you pay attention to that. Not that we don't trust people at night, but things happen in the dark that you can't really see.